Think forward. Think Research Channel.
New technologies have made us all mobile. In 2 decades, cell phones, often called mobiles outside of the United States, have gone from unique to ubiquitous. Today, the next phase of mobility involves the internet. Across the country, in homes and offices, on college campuses, in coffee shops and airports, and in a growing number of public places and spaces, wireless is everywhere or coming soon. We are wired, connected to the network, but we are also untethered, no strings attached. Our old model of technology-enabled collaboration in colleges and universities was that of one student working the computer while others watched. Our new understanding of collaboration is that each student is active. The sum is greater, better, more informed than the individual parts, and not dependent on one operator. We are all active, all involved, and all engaged. Additionally, the new definition of mobility, our new expectations for mobility, include mobile content. Not just music and video, of course, but also books, newspapers and magazines, and college lectures. What we want, when we want, and where we are. Again, all untethered, no strings attached. Hello, and welcome to Ready to Net, an interactive roundtable discussion focused on the challenges and the opportunities that e-learning and information technology present to higher education. We are broadcasting live from the WeTech conference in the Steinbeck Auditorium of the Monterey Convention Center here in Monterey, California. Today's program is titled The Mobile User. The opening video touched on the expanding dimensions of wireless and mobile technologies that affect many of us. Our program today will focus on 3 aspects of mobility: mobility in education, mobility in community, and mobility in public policy. Our goal today is to explore the impact of mobile and wireless networks, mobile content, and mobile users on education and learning, work, communities, and public policy. I'm pleased to welcome to our Ready to Net panel the first members for this segment. Diane Cordero de Noriega was formerly the provost and currently serves as the interim president of California State University, Monterey Bay. Vijay Murali is the vice president and chief information officer at Western Michigan University. And Victoria Szabo is an academic technology manager at Stanford University, where she is involved in the university's podcasting initiatives. Today's Ready to Net program is our 3rd program on wireless and mobile technologies. To anchor our discussion about mobility in education, we have a video clip drawn from our 2 previous programs on these issues in 2001 and 2002.
This technology will do the same thing that the cell phone did in terms of telecommunications and communicating generally. Last year in the United States, 100 million cellular telephones were sold. We predict by 2005, some 1.6 billion cellular phones will be sold worldwide. Those are staggering numbers if you think about them. And the implementation of this wireless technology will do the same types of things. Our students and faculty and staff and others are requiring that they can communicate instantaneously, and that's what this wireless initiative will do for your university and for mine. There is so much excitement associated with this initiative right now. Students are walking around on campus with their laptop computers, being able to communicate instantly, being able to surf the net, being able to communicate with faculty, send electronic messages in ways that they've never been able to do. They're not tethered anymore to the wire or the wall, if you will. Mm-hmm. That is a fundamental change in communication, and it'll also be a fundamental change in terms of how we run our universities.
What's the core value? What's the core proposition about wireless that's at and expanding at your respective campuses? Vijay, let's begin with you.
Well, I think the biggest impact is going to be felt by the students, and they are going to be part of this generation that's really going to make a difference towards the future. And I think as technology professionals, we are excited to be able to make that happen for them.
So the prospects of wireless in transforming really begs the question that we're talking about today is this transformation? Is this hype? Or is there no significant difference? And I think when it comes to the wireless computer technology, that we know that there are at least two significant major differences that in fact now we should be looking at. First of all, we really have the opportunity to combine two important parts. One is the actual live broadcast that wireless radio represented. But we can combine it with the on-demand feature of what the Sony Walkman represented, which is to say, with wireless technology, we can take the radio technology and we can take the Sony Walkman technology, join them together in a very, very important kind of way along the same features.
What do we know about the impact of these technologies?
It's significant. It improves participation, particularly for students who have not had the opportunity to buy computers or PDAs. It's critical to improving their self-esteem. It's critical to them getting access to resources they could never get access to. And it's also helpful for the institution to think differently about their own content and repackage it successfully.
We're back. Vijay Murali, of course, is here with us today. Lev Gonik and Gil Gonzalez will join us in later segments of the panel. Diane, you've been here at California State Monterey as provost and now as president. You've had a chance to watch this over a number of years, going back to when we did these first programs in 2001.
Yes, exactly.
Have we delivered on the promise of these technologies over the last 5 years?
I think we've delivered and then some. I mean, as I listened to that conversation from several years ago, I'm just floored by what has happened in these past few years in terms of the cell phone technology and the way that our students are using their cell phones. Text messaging. No one actually talks on the phone. They're all texting. The iPod, when Lev was talking about joining the Sony Walkman, and that has happened, and the way that iPods are being used is just, amazing to me. The wireless laptop, I think that is transforming how we teach and learn in our classrooms on a day-to-day basis. So I think we only barely scraped the surface when we started imagining 5 years ago how we would be using these technologies. And I think we're way beyond that.
Okay. Vijay, we pulled up a clip that's 5 years old. Are you comfortable or uncomfortable with what you said then as we reflect back today?
I think, as Diane has said, we are way past, and I'm glad 5 years ago we were able to see in some measure what was going to happen. But I think we've gone beyond what we even thought was possible 5 years ago to something that is so wonderful today with our students, staff, and faculty.
In the video, Elson Floyd, who was at that point at Western Michigan, is today as president of the University of Missouri System, talked about it's going to be students, and elsewhere in a clip that we didn't show, talked about this as a requirement. Is it a requirement today?
Yes, it is. At Western Michigan, we first, when we build buildings or do any new projects, it's all wireless first. We go to wired only as an option if our stakeholders request it. That is how ubiquitous it has become.
And Victoria, our friend Lev Gonik in the clip was talking about an iPod before there was an iPod on the market, this merger of the Walkman and mobility and everything else. Podcasting is exploding. Stanford is one of a number of universities. It's not just for internal students, but in fact to the world. What's compelling about this? And also, is this a kind of philanthropy? Several years ago when MIT said it was going to put all its course reserves out, this was kind of an academic philanthropy. People could now go to the MIT site to compare materials. What's so compelling about the podcasting technology, not as a music resource, not as an entertainment resource, as an academic resource?
Well, as an academic resource, I think it really is evolving out of the entertainment in the sense that students and faculty are already using these types of tools, and because they're using them in their home lives, they're starting to realize that they can be used in an academic sense. I think the other thing that's happened is our students are increasingly multitaskers. They want to do 10 things at once. They want to be on their chat, and they want to be writing their paper and listening to their music, and the mobility component of it allows them to do that. There's a sense that you can never have dead air in your life. You're walking down the road and you need to have your own personal soundtrack, and that's extended into how we think about academics. So we have faculty assigning listening exercises for students that they'll do while they're on the Stairmaster. Or they'll have an expectation that students will review their lectures later, and that therefore the students don't need to take notes necessarily, but instead they can be listening and then use the podcast for later review.
Is it your sense at Stanford that students are paying more attention to content because the fact they can go back, or in fact are they just deferring the classes and not doing and time shifting?
Well, we always hope that they're actually paying twice as much attention, but we're also aware that that's not necessarily the case. I think that there is a danger with any type of lecture situation that students are going to be off daydreaming, and so the idea that they might be also texting and such during that time is a problem. But we're also seeing that it really is reinforcing some of the lessons and making the lecture format vital for them.
Yeah. Is podcasting now part of as an academic leader in one sense, as the academic officer in your past life as president, and as you kind of survey the landscape, is podcasting now, as wireless was when we did our program 5 years ago, the next requirement in one sense? Will this be a skill that we'll all have to have, or at least a service that we'll all have to provide?
We probably don't know what version of podcasting we're going to be seeing in the next 5 years.
Yeah.
I mean, and those video clips brought that home to me more than anything this morning. But I believe that what we're seeing is going to be is another transformation that the podcast is going to have an incredible influence on in terms of how we interact with students in a teaching learning environment.
And DG, again, thinking about traditional students, in the program 5 years ago, you talked about, I think, your son who was 10 years old.
Yeah.
So the traditional students who are, that we think about, but that's only. Traditional students are 20% of the campus population these days.
Right.
The students who go to college from high school, live in dorms, maybe go to football or basketball games. There's a whole nother population of part-time students that most campuses deal with. Does the podcasting, does the wireless touch that population as well?
At Western Michigan University, we haven't gotten into podcasts in a big way because we are not quite sure that podcast is our future yet. We have small experiments going on, of course, but we are not sure that that's the way to go. The convergence of technology is going to bring about new ways of interaction with our students, not just those on campus, but those outside the campus as well. And that interaction can take many different forms. And we are experimenting with different technologies at the moment and betting on hopefully many, hoping that one would win the race.
I think that's very similar to what we're doing at Monterey Bay. We have faculty that are experimenting with a number of ways of delivering, and I think there's actually two things going on. One has to do with the students and how they're interacting with the technology in their personal lives, and then how the technology is being applied in the teaching and learning environment. And I think that's the piece that really has a major impact on academics and how students learn, whether they're traditional students or non-traditional students.
Victoria, but let me come back to Stanford. One of your colleagues from Stanford was quoted in Business Week last week. 15,000 downloads of podcasts from the Stanford website, and that's probably even more this week than it was last week. Clearly, this is not all Stanford students. It may be students at Monterey Bay. It may be Stanford alumni. It may be somebody in India or in China or in Europe. All of a sudden, again, we're sending content off campus. We're sending academic content off campus. What's Stanford thinking about this? Is this a good thing? Is this an interesting thing? Is this academic philanthropy?
Well, there certainly is an element of academic philanthropy to it. It's also a sense that Stanford isn't just the community of people who are actually in the physical location at a physical time, but rather the university community is extended outward. So there is a sense of wanting to give back to the community, not just in a philanthropic sense, but in a relevant sense. I think higher education, we're all struggling to figure out where we're going to go in the 21st century and how we relate to our communities and to society at large. I think that this particular initiative has also been almost more popular with alums and people out in the world than with students. There's a real hunger for quality content. It's wonderful that there's so many things out there, but something that has the Stanford stamp on it is more likely to seem as good. So there's still this conventional branding for value.
Yeah, but it sounds a little bit like .com edu too, in the one sense of with the web campus. There were going to be there were projections. Half a dozen campuses were going to push their content out. Come from Harvard, it would come from Stanford, come from Berkeley, from the, if you will, the most elites or the best known. That would drive out all other content. Podcasting probably, because the costs are lower, maybe a little bit more democratic. Almost anybody can podcast at this point. Will that, will we all now be doing our own radio broadcasts, as Lev talked about this merger of the Walkman 5 years ago?
But who's going to listen?
Yeah.
I think that's the question. We'll have 1,000 people
Yeah.
yakking about their opinions on something. So we're going to need a way to sift that out and to edit and to rate and value.
So this will be like the blogosphere. There'll be
That's
1,000
right.
bloggers and only 3 people reading all that stuff. Is that your
Right.
sense, Diane?
I think that's quite true. I think all the concerns about intellectual property, were sort of overblown
Yeah.
at one point. All the faculty who thought that they put their syllabi online, that somehow that this incredible content was going to be stolen by everyone, and gosh, nobody cared.
Big yawn?
Yeah.
Nobody cared, BG? What's your sense?
At this point, our faculty do care. But I think as the new generation of faculty comes on, I think there'll be less and less. I think the interest will be more towards putting the content out there for all the different groups of people that need them, including the non-traditional students that you spoke about.
You mentioned a new generation of faculty. I'm thinking about a current generation of faculty. I know that as I travel conferences and campuses, what I hear from many faculty, and in fact it was in a Wall Street Journal article last fall, it was in the Chronicle of Higher Education this week, faculty push back about wireless. Unhappiness, anger at times about students walking into class, the screens are up, the reflected glow, uncertain about what's going on, somebody on eBay, somebody IMing, is somebody looking for something from today's New York Times to raise a hand and say, oh, Professor Green, your data are wrong, I'm on the whatever website, and places, in fact, that are turning it off. Diane, what, your sense of what's going on at Monterey Bay and elsewhere on this kind of turn it off?
We're blessed with having still a very small campus and small class size.
Yeah.
And I think with small class sizes, there's much more opportunity to monitor as well as engage.
Yeah.
So I think all faculty have the no cell phone in class rule, which is fairly well implemented. But if the technology is being integrated into the teaching learning experience, there's less opportunity for the students being online. But we see that a lot. And you know where I see it the most? In our faculty meetings and administrator meetings. I'm looking at the tops of their heads, and they're all doing email or heaven knows what. But and it's not just the IT folks.
Right.
I mean, it's everybody.
Everybody's
are sitting
multitasking.
in meetings, multitasking in front of us.
So the multitasking that Victoria and VG talked about is not just limited to 18 to 22-year-olds.
Absolutely.
We're all doing it.
Well, yeah, I think the other thing is that we have to rethink the lecture format.
Yeah.
If people are so disengaged that they're going to be playing with their laptops and not paying attention, then maybe that's a sign to us that we're not getting through to them. And if we can use some of these technologies to tape a talking head because it is valuable in some ways, and then use that time for project-based activities, maybe we should.
I think that's exactly the point, is that this technology basically flies in the face of a traditional lecture discussion. If all you're going to do in class is lecture discussion, then yes, our audiences now, our students, our customers are going to be multitasking. So I think the key is some of the experiments that our faculty are doing, which is using that technology and engaging students in a transformative process.
What I'd like to add is that when we started the wireless project, we met with our faculty and we asked this question. Do you think this is going to be disruptive? How would you handle this? There was a lot of concerns expressed, of course, but as I explained to them, it's no different than a student in the olden days bringing books or novels to class and not paying attention. It's just that the time now is so much narrow, the bandwidth and the timing is so much narrow that you have a lot more students doing it, you're doing it a lot faster, and you're making a lot of noise. Reading a novel wasn't noisy. And so it all gets back to the faculty member making the class interesting enough for this new generation of children. And if it's harder today, it'll be a lot harder tomorrow, because the 15-year-olds that are today are not just multitaskers. I call them the multidimensional learners. They're learning at different dimensions, and each dimension has multitasking associated with it. So I totally agree with Victoria that faculty have to really teach very differently. I've actually attended the lectures of several faculty who teach, and I found them some lectures where the students are doing their thing, and then there are those that are paying rapt attention. And the ones that are paying rapt attention, and the faculty doesn't tell them, turn off your laptop, turn off your cell phone, turn off anything. It's because the lectures are so interesting that I was even spellbound. just listening to it.
I think that there's one difference, though, in that, again, if I walk into a class with a comic book or a novel, I'm in my own little world.
Right.
There is a risk for the faculty member. Again, as I said, I can go to the website and say, oh, Dr. Green, your data are wrong. Dr. Green, today's New York Times, something from the Library of Congress, something from the wherever it might be,
Right.
whether it's I'm going to sandbag a student with who I'm competing, or I feel I'm competing with for the grade, or in fact I want to embarrass the professor, there is the potential for this new level of Oedipal aggression in the classroom that's
And
not on the other side of the
Casey,
screen.
it's called accountability.
Yeah.
Faculty have to be accountable for
Okay.
what they teach and their content.
But I'll tell you, one of the fascinating outcomes of that, I actually co-taught a course last year. I hadn't been in front of freshmen for a long time. It was very exciting. And questions would come up that, and I was co-teaching it with my husband, that we couldn't answer. And so we would say, let's look. And so we would, with the students, engage in, researching questions that emerged.
Right, we don't have to do the interruption thing of come back on Tuesday.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Go right to the
Instant-
web. It's
Right.
not
The
instruction,
time.
interrupt us, right.
And,
Yes.
and I found that to be incredibly
Right.
valuable, and it was,
Right.
and it really engaged the students.
Let me ask the pushback question about podcasting in the same sense. Again, Diane, you had was the big yawn. We thought everything was going to be valuable. It wasn't the case. A concern on the part of faculty. I'm putting my lectures out there. Again, do we have the risk about my intellectual property is now out and exposed for others to use, perhaps appropriately, perhaps otherwise? A sense of pushback that you're hearing from people at Stanford, Victoria, or is this just a non-issue, or will it be a non-issue, as Diane suggested, over time?
Well, I think it's an issue, at least initially. I know that as we're beginning to put content out, we're thinking about release forms and what they do say and what they don't say and how the content can be reused. We've been talking to the Creative Commons people about putting a stamp on some of the content so that there's at least a sense of containment. There's a little bit of the fear that the Stanford Professor's Greatest Hits DVD will be secretly distributed. But then there's the other anxiety.
Or the outtakes.
Yeah, or the outtakes, right. And then there's the other anxiety that the professors themselves might decide they're just going to go on and have a little side action.
Yeah.
And so there's been concerns, legal and ethical concerns. But I think the other thing that we've come to is the classroom moment is something that often is transient and useful, but that the kind of things that people want to put out for public consumption are often a little bit more prepared, a little bit more targeted to a wider audience. What we're finding is that when we tape a lecture, people in the class will pay attention to it, but it's really the public lectures with a speaker who's addressing a wider audience that's going to be more interesting to the big public.
Ready to Net's always had a focus on impact and assessment. And so I want to go to the video again. Our friend and actually the Ready to Net co-creator Lev Gonick, when he was here at Cal State Monterey some years ago, talking about assessment and evaluation 5 years ago from our May 2001 program. If we can go to video.
I think there are a whole series of important research questions that we're now confronted with. And what I'm hoping that we're able to do through this discussion and other discussions around the country is to begin to explore what difference does the nomadic computing environment do to the teaching and learning, the research and the service parts of the campus. I think we're only beginning to scratch those issues. We need active engagement with our faculty colleagues and with our students to begin to sort those issues out. This is probably a great 18 to 36-month kind of research project, and I'm certainly looking forward to working with Vijay and others from around the country on the technology side to begin to explore those kinds of issues.
Vijay, Lev said it was an 18 to 36-month issue. We're 60 months into this. Where are we in terms of the campus efforts, in terms of evaluating real hard evidence about the impact?
We went through, our faculty actually went through the evaluation of wireless, and I can tell you that our students wouldn't come on campus without it, wouldn't live without it, and now are demanding that it be in their residence halls, which is wired, because we charge a fee for that. And so we are going to have to provide it. That was the last place we had not done. They've also come back and they said that is the most reliable service that they've ever had on the technology side. So we know we did something right. They also use it ubiquitously. In fact, we have wireless that goes out, bleeds through the edge of the campus, and some of our faculty and students live there and wouldn't buy a house or trade it for anything else in the world. It is the strangest thing, but it has been phenomenally successful.
Diane, where are we into this research and evaluation agenda for impact?
I think that the expectation, as Vijay has stated, that students come to us now with much different expectations with regard to the service that they're going to receive. So it's assumed that this will be available to them. I think what is exciting about the research questions that go beyond simply the satisfaction with the service that comes with the wireless technology is the learning piece and how wireless technology impacts learning. And I know that the research projects that have been going on our campus have all had that research component to determine whether in fact learning has been enriched by the application of the wireless technology. And those results are now starting to come in. And I think that overall, as we're looking at the outcomes of the learning, that the enhanced learning is
Hard evidence.
coming through pretty clearly in those projects. And that's the part that's very exciting to me, because students are walking away then not only with an application of how to use tools differently, whether they're going to be scientists, whether they're going to be archaeologists, whether they're going to be, studying language and culture, but they're also having deeper learning as a result of it. And I think that's really the exciting piece.
And Victoria, at Stanford, you're beginning the podcasting cycle in one sense, much as where we were with wireless 5 years ago. Is there an evaluation? You don't have to give us the details, but in fact, is there a real evaluation plan at Stanford, or is it going to be more epiphany as opposed to evidence?
Well, there's certainly a lot of anecdotal evidence at this point. Trying to figure out how to compare a wireless or a podcast class without a podcast class, there isn't that level of experimentation going on. I think the things that we're doing are based more on already existing educational research. So when you think about using these kinds of tools, having students build projects and put them up as a podcast, what we're really drawing upon is the idea that project-based learning and collaborative learning are effective ways for students to do their work and to build knowledge. So in some sense, the assessment part has already happened in the types of learning research that's already done. That being said, the specific choices that we make for the technology, we do still need to evaluate. And we have had various surveys and things asking people about the effectiveness and how they liked this or that. But it's all part of a larger conversation about pedagogy, as I've been saying.
I want to give you each a last but a very quick moment to tell us what we need to do better and what we've done well and what we've done better as we look at the next 5 years, and what will we need to consider when we come back and look at this archive 5 years as we went to the last one. Vijay, we used you first on the archive. Let me start with you.
Well, I think we've done a great job with getting the technology up for our faculty. 5 years ago or 6 years ago, there was resistance, but just like students, our faculty have adopted maybe a little slower than was needed. I think what we need to do a better job is bringing our faculty along with the next wave of technology that is yet to come.
Victoria, what will we need to do to really deliver on the potential of podcasting as a mobile technology?
We really need to figure out the intellectual property and fair use goals. Until we can really share content without fear, we're going to be constrained. Many faculty have asked me to put content up in a podcast form or to have students do projects where they use content that they can't because we're concerned about transcoding and things like that. So we really need to figure out with industry how we're going to handle that.
Great. And Diane, last thought, given where we've come, where do we go in the next 5 years?
We probably need better crystal ball.
Better crystal ball?
I really feel like we need to constantly stay ahead of the game and be predicting and thinking ahead so that we can be prepared for what might come. And Lev was a wonderful predictor, so I think we should go back to Lev and ask him in one of the next segments. What's going to be the next thing that we need to prepare for?
Great. Well, my thanks to the three of you, to our panel, Diane Cordero de Noriega, Vijay Murali, and Victoria Szabo for their observations about mobility and education. We'll be right back with Ready to Net after this short break. Thank you all.
Still will be a relevant question because mobility is important. It may not be a laptop. It could be one of those internet appliances. It could be one of those little devices you see on TV on your eyes. Yeah. It could be a wristwatch that's talking to you. So we may see the growth of this in different forms in the future. but it'll still be there. It'll be relevant. It's the convenience that's going to drive it.
Welcome back to Ready to Net. Our second segment today will focus on mobility and community. We want to explore the attributes of successful wireless and mobility initiatives. I'm pleased to welcome to our Ready to Net panel, Leslie Buckaloo, who is the U.S. Education Industry Manager at Cisco Systems. Alan Friedman serves as the CIO of the California State Parks System. Lev Gonik is Vice President and CIO at Case Western Reserve University and also Board Chair of One Cleveland. Lev, of course, was helped create Ready to Net several years ago. And Arlene Krebs directs the Wireless Education and Technology Center at Cal State University, Monterey Bay. Welcome all, and my thanks to all of you for joining us today. Leslie, admittedly and somewhat unfairly, I'm going to begin with you in this segment. It was some years ago, Cisco CEO John Chambers talked about education as the killer app of the internet. Got a lot of attention, created a lot of buzz. We're now 5 years, 6 years, 7 years past that point. Is wireless the new killer app of the internet? Is mobility the new killer app of the internet?
Well, that's a great question, and it is a little bit unfair to start with me, but certainly Cisco believes that we are changing the way we work, learn, live, and play. Mm-hmm. That is our tagline, and the internet has changed all of that, absolutely. Unequivocally. I think wireless is the enabler now that's providing, ubiquitous communication anywhere, anytime, so that we can do the things we want to do. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes.
Okay. Lev, you got good press from the last panel. They seem to be, think that the clips from several years ago were great. But Case, where you are now as CIO and Vice President, has been at the center of a very unique campus-community partnership in terms of not extending the boundaries of access through a broadband initiative called One Cleveland. Why should any campus get involved in these kinds of campus community initiatives related to broadband and wireless access, projects that go beyond the campus boundary?
Well, I think historically we've actually made a mistake in our physical architecture. Almost all of the major universities in this country have the backs of their buildings facing the community. And of course, in the 21st century, it's hard to physically move those buildings, but using wireless and broadband, we're able to do that in a very important virtual way. And town-gown relationships are always a historic challenge for universities. And at Case in Cleveland, we have just hundreds of programs where students are doing voluntary service, faculty are engaged in research, staff are living in the community, much as Vijay was saying around Western Michigan and Kalamazoo. In all of those contexts, creating a bigger ecosystem in which we have a bridge to the community rather than a moat around the community is a really important consequence of the mobility that we now provide.
Alan, Lev mentioned ecosystem, so I'm going to use that as a hook into the California parks. Why is the state park system interested in Wi-Fi? I mean, is this about convenience, the fact that people can send email back to their offices or check their accounts or pay bills while they're in the parks, or is there really something about an added value to the park experience if there's Wi-Fi?
Well, I think Leslie was right. Companies like Cisco have changed the way that Californians work and play. We have 100 million people a year that come to California state parks, and many of them want to stay connected when they're at a state park. And Wi-Fi in our parks provides them that opportunity to stay connected. They can also send email home to their kids and grandkids. They can check on road conditions, and they can, if they have a really good time at the state park, they can make a reservation for the next park down the road.
Yeah, but Wi-Fi in the parks is actually about a larger set of issues about public Wi-Fi service for the state, isn't it, in one sense?
Actually, we are a very special case. We have 278 park units around the state, and they are in some of the most remote locations in California. And there really aren't any alternatives in many of the communities and parts of the state that our parks are located in.
So Wi-Fi might work where my cell phone might not?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. And Arlene, the Wireless Technology Center is engaged in research. You're supposed to be tracking what's going on about the deployment of mobile and wireless technologies. 2 years into the research agenda, what can you tell us in sort of top-level bullet points about the impact of these technologies on campuses and communities?
We're actually changing the way traditional fields like geology and archaeology were once conducted. We are doing real-time data collection and analysis, and our students are collecting this data in the field. At our campus, anything that you can do with a wire doesn't interest us in terms of wireless. We're interested in how you can extend the classroom into the community, and in that level, we've been enormously successful by creating partnerships and activities that enhance and enrich so that our students, as Diane mentioned in the previous segment, they have enhanced learning. They are definitely engaged. They are spending more and more time on classroom materials. Other students can watch them as they're collecting data. So our research is indicating that the more you transform your pedagogy, the deeper and more extensive and broader the learning becomes, because it's no longer confined to the campus.
These boundaries, again, Lev, the One Cleveland experience, it's Cleveland schools, it's the Cleveland community, it's the suburban stuff. You're a couple of years into this. What are the first lessons that are coming out of One Cleveland about these relationships?
Well, I think what we're beginning to learn is that, in fact, learning doesn't stop in the classroom. We need a paradigm shift in the way we actually then think about teaching. And in fact, Arlene's examples, which I've had the privilege of seeing on previous visits here, in terms of archaeological work that's being done in the field, for students, that really is probably pretty natural. In fact, a case in general, students no longer have much of an aha factor around wireless. So in the community, this is really an extension of the learning environment, and it's really an extension of the physical being in a way that is much more natural than the artificiality, if you will, of learning in the classroom. And how then you do real-time data and real-time, beginning to process cognitively those experiences while you're actually engaged in a service learning activity or engaged in real-time data at the Mendel School, involved in poverty studies. That's a very, very important cognitive process, which doesn't mean you take the notes, then you go back to your dorm room and then you study them, and then you come back to the teacher the next day in class. That can all happen in a much more transparent way. And I think that's part of the true paradigm shift and around which data will follow.
Ellen, in the parks, there's the notion, as Lev and Arlene have described it, Leslie described it, about learning in the community. Does that also then put new challenges, new demands, new opportunities for the way the park system thinks about how it defines its website and services?
I think it really creates new opportunities for us. One of the reasons why we're very excited about our Wi-Fi program is that we are able to provide free Wi-Fi access to our department website and all of the other websites operated by other state departments around the state. So we felt that was a real positive contribution to the visitor experience when they come to a state park. They can go to Caltrans' website, they can pay their taxes to the Board of Equalization or the Franchise Tax Board.
They can make a donation to the park service, right?
They absolutely. But we are also really excited because we want to extend the opportunities for access to include podcasting. Because we don't have enough state park employees at each one of our park units, you oftentimes can go into a park and not find an interpreter to tell you about the resources contained in the park unit. But if we have audio resources, MP3 files on our website, you can download an audio tour, and all the kids can install them on their iPods and walk around the park and gain some interpretive value, which they couldn't achieve if we didn't have the Wi-Fi in the parks.
It's the next generation.
Are you using the Wi-Fi infrastructure for doing actually real-time monitoring of services in the parks? I know in Cleveland, that's kind of one of the most interesting things has been the adoption of the Wi-Fi. Now that it's there, and of course the university put it into place, but how many other people are using it, not just for what we've been talking about, these kind of transactional service emails and the like, but actually using it for monitoring seismic activity, monitoring emissions, things certainly that are interesting in our space. Anything happening in the parks?
We're not monitoring emissions yet, but some of our employees are, because they're located in very remote locations around the state, don't have other opportunities for connectivity other than the Wi-Fi service in the park. So one of the added benefits of the Wi-Fi service is that our own employees are able to do mundane things like fill out timesheets online. They can. We have tens of thousands of facilities that we maintain using a computerized maintenance management system. So it improves the productivity of our own employees.
Let's go to video for a moment, because again, this notion of extending the notion of campus and community, we have actually a video about Monterey where this is actually going on.
Monterey is a unique place. We're large enough to have a number of exciting and vibrant and world-class things going on, yet we're small enough where we still have a good sense of community. A big part of the region's economy is built on higher education and research and the private sector activity that tends to follow it. The number one service challenge was to find new ways to connect together our assets. We have recreation centers and fire stations and our harbor master office, a conference center, as well as our civic center. And we were connected together with T1, DSL, dial-up, tin can and string at times. Now we're able to video conference between facilities. At the same time, this network also helps us with our public service mission. Used to be they'd take notes on scratch pads or come back to the office and work with their computer. Now all that information is available to them out in the field. It helps us improve our public safety out to the community. It lets us do more with the tools we have.
This is a segment from a longer video about Monterey as a connected community that was produced with support from Cisco Systems. Leslie, as you watch this video and as you think about what's going on with your campus clients and your community clients, is there more interest? Are more people coming to you and to Cisco to say, help us make these kinds of connections?
Yeah, absolutely. As we look across all of North America and we look across the globe, we're finding communities are connecting in new ways. And what's happening is that the synergy of the relationship is building a whole new level of connectivity, of application, of solving problems. And this is pretty exciting. Whether we're in Dubai or Denver, we are seeing communities meld together. But what I think we need to have are a few visionary people. Lev Gonik is one of them. He helped start some of this. You have other city leaders, Fred Cohen. You have others who get an idea planted. So the connectivity is very possible, and Cisco can do it. It's not a problem technologically. The challenge, I think, is the working together as a community and building this connected community, which is really important because the communities of the future, just like the industrial age along transportation corridors, are going to be right along information corridors. And we're certainly enabling that.
Arlene, if technology is not the problem, how is it that some cities, Cleveland, Monterey, Philadelphia, with this conversation underway, get it and other cities don't seem to get it yet?
I think that they are starting to get it, and I think when we talk about community, there are various levels of community. We see that mobility transforms our concepts of community. There's community on the campus, an extended community to the outlying areas like Monterey, or in our case, Seaside Marina. And then there are new communities that are formed, such as our relationship with Alan's California State Department of Parks. We have education applications. So as we model and showcase and demonstrate and take more and more risk, fail, flounder, succeed, go back, exceed, excel. As we create these models, other people get it. And I think the resistances are more in the public policy, in the economic context, in the understanding, in the implications context. Technology is there. It's the contextual, the social, cultural, economic issues that are the ones we have to solve. And as we work through these with these partnerships, we can show that we can solve them. They're human problems. They're not technological problems.
Alan, the Parks gets it. Do other parts of California state government that you have to interact with get it? Or is this still on different parts of a learning curve?
I think that we have fairly unique needs in the state park system, but there are other departments that use wireless extensively. Caltrans, as an example, has a big investment in wireless. Freeway cams around the state use wireless technology. Mm-hmm. But we are fairly unique because of the rural locations that we're in. And we have because we have the resources, we have opportunities to form partnerships with educational institutions like CSU, Monterey Bay, Scripps Institute of Oceanography down in Southern California. We have some great opportunities for wireless.
Lev, you got a steady stream of visitors into Cleveland now. One Cleveland has taken on national and international prominence as people come in and say, how do we do One Cleveland? Can you franchise this? Give us the magic pill, or wave the magic wand. What's involved with others? What does it take for a community to get it? How difficult was it in Cleveland, and what do you see about the experience of others?
Well, I'd say there's 3 quick lessons that we share as part of the secret sauce, although we don't give away all the ingredients, or if we do, we just a little bit too much sugar, if you will. First, governance. To Arlene's point, it's very, very important to realize that how you organize the community. We have a tough enough time governing our own campuses. Imagine the complexity of trying to actually engage in governance beyond the community. The second major feature here is working with the vendor community. Again, traditionally in higher education, we oftentimes have a bias. If it's not homegrown, we're not all that interested in it. Reality is that One Cleveland and the model that we now provide, this one community model, would not be possible without deep commitments at the vendor level. And the third piece of it has to do with executive sponsorship. It's very important. We keep saying technology is not the problem. Let's set aside that and let's acknowledge that technology is a big challenge. But the real challenge is finding language, finding examples and stories that matter to the CEOs, to the other members of the decision-making environments, because our language is almost impenetrable to the community, because the real question is, what difference does this make to Joe's citizen, or to this child in the inner city school system, or to the person who's working as a building inspector using the mobile technology? That's the language, and that doesn't typically come from the technology community. It's part of this kind of attempt to create language that can be shared. Those are the 3 pieces: governance, and certainly CEO engagement, and then working very hard with the vendor community.
Yes.
What do you look for when you hear these proposals, Leslie?
Well, I look for exactly those points, someone who can actually carry the project off, because it is complex and it is very political. I think there's no question. And we've got the policy people coming up next. It'll be interesting to hear their engaging dialogue. But that there can be some vision and some strength to the relationship, and then solidly going to stay the course, because there are some fits and starts on this.
And what I'd like to say is you need risk takers at all levels. Risk takers on the campus, faculty members and students working with them, because we've learned that our students are light years ahead and pick up, and we're totally dependent on their skill set to help make these technologies function properly. But the risk takers and the community leaders who are willing to go that extra mile to make that project work and to create those partnerships are absolutely crucial.
Arlene, I would just add that an important piece is also ability to execute. And one of the things is that we do a lot of one-offs, and even a one-off is to say, the campus being a one-off in the context of a broader city or other setting. And the real challenge is getting enough momentum behind the concept of creating this ecosystem of mobile, pervasive, wireless connectivity. And that requires a huge amount of gumption and some set of partners who can actually execute on it. And it's not just the technical execution, is why are we actually doing this? To what end? How do you create the linkages between the universities and the public sector, between the universities and the schools, the museums, the libraries, and the like? Those are dialogues that have been artificially stunted for generations. Right. And our ability to execute on those conversations are equally important.
Alan, state government is not known as a very risk-forward enterprise. Is the situation at the California, and I'm not talking just California, but the state government in general, is the park situation unique, or in fact are others in California government and elsewhere watching what you're doing and say, there's something we can take away from this as we look forward and we look at these issues?
Well, since we, in state government, we come from the wrong side of the railroad tracks, we have to be pretty creative in order to make do with resources. And so, as I mentioned, we can't afford T1 circuits into all 278 park units. So we had to be creative and look at ways to meet our visitor needs as well as solving our own internal business problems. This summer is going to be the first peak season that all of our 54 Wi-Fi access hotspots are in place, and so we are really excited at looking at the analytics to see how successful we've been in deployment.
Great. I mentioned in a previous segment that ReadyToNet has always had a focus on impact and assessment. That said, we should also ask, what's the hard evidence about the investment in mobility, wireless networks, and mobile content in the broader context of campus and community initiatives? Leb, One Cleveland again, as one of the first of these projects. what's the hard evidence for impact in terms of what's happened over the last several years with One Cleveland?
Right. Well, let me just start with the campus first, Casey. We know across the country, and here's some counterintuitive messaging here, because this is ready to net. This is an audience that gets it. But across the country, fewer than 50% of universities have actually deployed more than 50% of their campus under an umbrella of wireless. Fewer than 25% of all campuses across the country actually have wireless inside their residence halls. So there's a long way to go in terms of getting the infrastructure layer in place before we start really looking at the core impact that's out there.
Consumer sector in this case is well ahead of the campus.
Well ahead of the campus, notwithstanding some incredible leadership that certainly comes from Western Michigan and Case and Monterey and others. That being said, across the One Cleveland project, that we've measured our impact by actually the question of the penetration and the bandwidth consumption. So bandwidth consumption in One Cleveland over the 2.5 years has gone up 7-fold. That is to say, the aggregate demand for bandwidth occasioned by both ultra broadband and wireless. And the wireless, of course, ties back to, in fact, the backhaul is over optical networking. That's a huge statement. In terms of pervasive use, at the campus, we've gone from 50 to 75 to 85% of freshman students actually, and again, we measure each of those, are using and adopting. The Cleveland school system, which is going under a $1 billion renovation, has, because of the One Cleveland project, providing now what was not in scope, namely wireless services for every school, all 117 schools in the school system, and they are both, again, wirelessly and wired to the One Cleveland infrastructure. And in turn, likewise, we see both our Cleveland Clinic hospitals and the university hospital systems, all, again, not only doing wire, but wireless for applications that are not just about nice-to-haves, but must-have kinds of issues around patient care and asset and tracking and management, all being made possible through mobility.
Ellen, how will the parks evaluate this summer? What will be the metrics that will be at the top of the executive summary to say we did well and done good, if you will?
We're going to look at the detailed statistics produced by all of the access points. Anecdotally, however, I think it's easy to say that we've been very successful. I initially expected pushback from some of our ranger community who felt that our park should be a refuge from technology. But it turns out that in the year 2006, they want to use the net too. And so we haven't seen that pushback. In addition, there are some other benefits. At some of our parks, it can be hard to find a camp host, someone who lives in a campsite for an extended period of time and provides some services to other campers. It's a lot easier to provide camp hosts at park units that have Wi-Fi because they can stay connected with their kids and grandkids. So we look forward to assessing this first complete season of use and to see how well we've done.
Arlene, at a broad scale, what are the 3-4 metrics we should look for as measures of success?
I was actually going to tell a story about that, which is one of the metrics of success, I would say, is evidenced in a little city here called Sand City, where they have now, through the initiatives of the police department, making the city completely wireless, giving laptops to the lowest economic families in their city, and teaching the children how to use the internet for research. So there's a metaphor that the metrics are how far and how deep do you go into government agencies within a community, be they schools, be they city government, be they police or fire, to transform the way people are living and learning. We are just at the beginning of the age of mobility, and it is a totally transformative experience. And what we have to look at is not just the technological models or data, not just the person-to-person transformation, but what we're doing to language, to behavior, to culture. And when we start to penetrate those deeper issues, then we'll have an understanding of what mobility's impact is. But we're not scratching that surface yet.
Leslie, these activities are an investment for Cisco, and Cisco clearly has different metrics than One Cleveland and the parks. What are the metrics that Cisco looks at, or what are the metrics that we should all look at through a filter from Cisco?
Well, Cisco has an initiative called Cisco Connected Communities, and I think it fits very well with everything we've spoken about. And that's bringing people together for whatever purpose that might achieve. And whether it's students on a campus or connecting students to the community and to businesses and to nonprofits and to non-governmental organizations, we want to improve people's life and work and experience. And what we found is that rich media is very powerful. It is transformative. And even students who have challenges in terms of learning or students with disabilities are able to get connected and use the technology. So really criteria-wise is we just want to improve the life of citizens. We want to cover communities and wireless mesh networks so that you can have access, you can do whatever you need to do wherever you are.
Great.
Can I just add, I mean, just on a Cisco kind of perspective, in Cleveland, what we're most interested in terms of our effort around economic development is that we're able to keep Cisco in Cleveland because Case is producing RF engineers that are going to Cisco's aerospace facilities in Cleveland, Ohio. 165 of RF engineers, everyone who uses Cisco wireless, all of that technology, at least that core technology, is based in Cleveland. Our ability to keep Cisco in Cleveland as opposed to
This is Alan's ecosystem.
Well, instead of the temptation to actually move out to the coast will be an important piece of evidence. And not because we're guaranteed any success here, but that in fact that the universities are producing the kinds of engineers, that the major companies are interested in consuming that talent, and that likewise entrepreneurs are being able to actually populate all kinds of points for third-party sourcing of value around the ecosystem. Those are going to be very, very important measures of success as well.
Yeah. Great.
And I would just add one final comment. The creative community of the 21st century is absolutely going to be technologically based. If you don't have technology in place, you will not be able to compete. That's just the way it's going to be.
Okay, and I was going to offer you each a final comment. So Leslie, I'm going to let that
Okay,
one be
I'm done.
yours as the clock runs. Arlene, a last quick comment in terms of what else we need to consider in the broad issue of mobility and community.
I think that maintaining momentum is a really important aspect, which means that all of the partnerships that we've begun have to be expanded and deepened with, and Lev was absolutely correct, the vendor community is part and parcel of this great experiment, as are risk-taking citizens, faculty members, and students. And that we have to continue to innovate and continue to believe that what we are doing really makes a difference.
Alan, last thought?
The mission of the California State Park System is to educate and inspire Californians about the natural and cultural resources of the state park system. I think it's very clear from listening to all of my colleagues here on the panel that rich media, the availability of rich media can help transform the experience of people and inspire and to educate in complete consistency with the mission of our department. So we look forward to implementing technology in ways that do inspire and educate.
And Lev, Diane, in the last panel said we should ask you for the crystal ball, since you told us about an iPod before it arrived in one sense. What's your crystal ball for the last comment as we close this segment?
I would say that in the next 3 years or so, Casey, we will hopefully not be talking about mobility as an infrastructure project. It will all be about collaboration tools. And I think universities who are creating content, vendors, partners, libraries, park systems, and the like, it will be how we use those collaborative tools. We will actually, I'm less sure that we're going to see new devices, although there will be new form factors. What will be distinctive will be the ability to have presence, the idea that at any point in time, you can, if you choose to, be followed through your mobile technology, and not only be able to be tracked on, again, with your permission, but be able to have the kinds of interactions that you're interested in, whether those are data-based, IM, SMS, whether those are voice-based, or whether they will be, in fact, interactive video-based. And I think those are the things, all of which are going to sit on a mobile platform that we're going to see. It's going to become much less of a spectator sport and much, much more of a contact sport in the next 5 years.
Great. Well, my thanks to the three of you and to this panel, Leslie Buckaloo, Alan Friedman, Lev Gonick, and Arlene Krebs, for joining us for this conversation about mobility and community. And we'll be right back for our third segment of today's program about mobility and public policy. Thank you all. Welcome back to Ready to Net. The third and final segment of today's broadcast will focus on mobility and public policy. Given their titles and affiliations, our panel members for this third and final segment should have some interesting perspectives on this issue. Gil Gonzalez serves as the Chief Information Officer at California State University, Monterey Bay. Nicole Ozier directs the Civil Liberties and Technology Project for the American Civil Liberties Union of Northern California. Christopher Saka is the Head of Special Initiatives at Google, and Rupert Young serves as a Director for Business Development at AT&T. Welcome all. Thanks for joining us. Gil, I'm going to begin this segment with you, if you will, as the nominal academic on this group, campus-based. I'm going to ask you to begin to kind of map what are some of the key issues that should concern us in terms of the public policy conversations about mobility and public policy.
Well, I've listened to the other two panels, and they've got some great descriptions of what's happening to us. We're not creating universities that are looking outward. Our initiatives are swirling around the community with county and city and government initiatives. Mobility becoming a pervasive theme in our discussions. It's causing us to do things very differently, cause us to work very differently. So the first thing I'd like to say is the social construct and relation between organizations is changing because of mobility. The second thing is the implications of that, which includes privacy, which includes how we treat each other, how we identify who we are and where we are at any given time, because that impacts the services and the security that we wrap around all of our initiatives. And then the last thing I would say is the world is changing around how cities are reinventing themselves in relation to how universities are part of their now fabric for economic development. So the world is changing because of mobility. It's for many of us, it's no longer about technology. It is about social change. And we think that's an important part because that introduces change to support new ways of learning, new ways of teaching, new ways of working together.
Great, thanks. Nicole, I'm sure you're going to have something to say about privacy, but you direct the technology initiatives for ACLU Northern California. From the ACLU perspective and the work that you're doing, what are some of the key issues that should concern all of us on campus, in communities, in corporations, as civilians, as we look at public policy issues about mobility?
The ACLU fully supports municipal wireless. We want wireless to be in communities, in colleges, but we want to ensure that people are not paying for municipal wireless with their privacy and free speech. We see new technology really revolutionizing how we communicate, how we live, how we work. This is very beneficial. But what we're also seeing is in both municipal wireless and in other technologies that civil liberties like privacy, like free speech, are often overlooked or sometimes even actively ignored. And so we want to ensure that as business models are rolled out across the country, that they're protective of privacy and free speech. And we're seeing many, many business models across the country for municipal wireless basing their models on tracking who you are, what you're looking at, and where you're looking at it from. And there's a really significant both privacy implications as well as chilling effect if you're looking at personal information like financial information or health information, political information, or perhaps you're just looking for a new job. Having a system who knows who you are, exactly what you're looking at and where you're looking at it from really impacts people's freedom to be able to look at sensitive information. And one thing that's particularly concerning is, it might just not be the companies that get this private information, but we saw in the last several weeks revelations about giant telecom turning over the records of billions of innocent Americans. And we saw just this morning,
you have a prop for us.
I have USA Today. In USA Today this morning, that Attorney General Gonzalez asked the largest internet companies to agree that they would hold the email records and the web searches for up to 2 years. We don't know what the situation's going to be, but once the private information is out there, you don't know who's going to have access to it, how it's going to be used or abused. So we really want to ensure that those safeguards are put in place as we're rolling out new infrastructure.
Great, thank you. Chris, there's those who see great opportunity in the efforts of corporations, Google and others, to launch free or low-cost public wireless and internet services. Others see problems as private entities, Google, AT&T, others that are part of this conversation, contract for public services. What's the public good in this for Google in the area of community, maybe what we call civic wireless services. And Google's already got a project up in Mountain View, as I understand it. What's Google learned from its year-long experience in Mountain View that carries into some of the other conversations? Or at least what can you tell us that doesn't violate a non-disclosure agreement and corporate secrets?
There aren't non-disclosure agreements when you've got a community-based project like we have here.
Right.
And I think that's, to start with your second question, that's the first thing we learned, is that normally when developing a Google product, you can kind of work on it in the lab, put it up on the site, and let users come and discover it for themselves. However, when you're building a network like this, you really have to start with the community and get their input from the beginning. So in Mountain View, at the city where we're headquartered, we started building a network there. Literally, our exploratory stage of the project started with the town librarian, the chief of police, the superintendent of schools, the principal at one of the elementary schools, the town poet, and just folks about town, and many of our employees who also live in that community. And I think that leads into helping us uncover the civic benefit. It's great right now that in the Bay Area particularly, there is pervasive broadband available. It's available at relatively high prices. Throughout the United States, usually it's not as available as cheaply or as pervasively, but there is broadband available to the home. But outside the home, there really aren't many options. There's very high-priced, expensive 3G systems, but you don't have connectivity outside the home. So we think that's one problem that needs to get solved, is what can we do to go ahead and increase competitive access to the home, but outside the home? I was speaking with Gil earlier about how internet is used on his campus, and he was talking about how in some of the classrooms it's being used as a complement to education in real time, that while lecturers are lecturing, people are looking up terms to go ahead and complement the discussion they're finding, contrary opinions, and raising the stakes in the debate.
Sandbagging the professor.
Absolutely, yeah. We think the same thing can happen across life, is that I think the internet can be a great resource to complement your life experience as you move throughout a community, as you want to learn more about a center, as you have an idea, you want to back up an argument with facts. And so we think that access outside the home is a great civic benefit. Of course, on top of that can be built an ecosystem of all kinds of public services. Once you start a network like this, people come out of the woodwork everywhere with great ideas on how they can use it. And we think that as the platform builder, it's our job to make it as accessible as possible and let the ecosystem go ahead and thrive on top of that.
Great, thanks. And Rupert, AT&T is back. This is clearly not my father or my grandfather's phone company or the AT&T that they knew. Again, same kind of question. From AT&T's perspective, what are some of the issues involved with mobility and public policy, mobility and wireless, public wireless?
I think anytime you bring private and public entities together, the intersection is very complicated. The whole time frames of figuring out permitting and all the different interest groups. But on the other hand, when you do bring everyone together, it's really powerful. And I think from our perspective, when you can bring both sides together, you get a lot more added benefit than if we kind of work against each other. Wi-Fi, per se, is just one technology, and right now there's a big rush to put Wi-Fi in, but in a couple of years it's being WiMAX and 4G wireless, and in some sense we could get into an environment where if public entities are doing this all themselves, where it would be like television was in the U.S., where we all picked NTSC, and then 5 years later, PAL came along. It was much better technology, and the rest of Europe and so on had better TV, for 30 years than we did.
So is part of this an issue about standards in terms of having a national standard that's competitive? The fact that overseas, for example, you mentioned 3G, right? That the fact that we lag on some of these issues, is this part of the public policy issue that also needs to be up front as well?
I mean, I think to some degree, but I think cities in some sense are, they're hearing from vendors and others that, maybe this technology is really rock solid and ready and is going to be around. I mean, in some sense, we have customers, say, hey, we're a utility or whatever, we need this to be there for 15 years. And we say, tell us what technology in a network sense has been around for 15 years. I mean, if we all ran around, 10 years ago, we said, okay, let's all build public ATM networks or SMDS or some other technologies
that have since vanished.
They've vanished. Yeah. Wi-Fi, if you're not planning well, it's just a technology. It's not really the application. And as Gil and I were talking before, it's easy to get wrapped up in thinking about the technology and Wi-Fi solves everything, but it is really about mobility, and there's edge, there's 3G, there's going to be 4G, there's WiMAX, and so on.
Gil, let me turn to you. Planning well.
Well, planning is, there are planning assumptions in every well thought through initiative. And one of the planning assumptions that educational institutions especially have to account for is that you're going to get overlaid. You don't control it. You can't stop somebody from offering a service on the geography you call a campus, or the geography that serves your students, or the geography of where your faculty live. There's a whole lot of interest to provide high bandwidth to those individuals because we think it improves their work, it improves their connectivity and building a community on campus and so on. But the planning assumptions are changing around us because of the good work of a lot of individuals who are coming up with creative ways to provide options for folks. And I think that's part of what's important to us. It isn't about the single solution, it's about the solutions that get us further along the path that we have to go to, as long as we understand, of course, the implications. And that's the planning dilemma that a lot of us get into is, in a lot of these organizations, municipal organizations, universities, the level and depth of understanding of technology varies wildly from K-12 to universities. And yet all of us are engaged in deploying technology aggressively. That's why as we build new communities of CIOs or new communities of organizations that work together, we think we buffer some of that and improve the quality of our work in collaboration with vendors, in collaboration with our city partners. So part of what we're talking about in terms of mobility again is, the implication is we have to work together because we don't stop our work once we get past the property line.
Okay. In the last panel, about property lines and boundaries and everything else, in the last panel we talked a little bit about risk and leadership. Chris, let me turn to you and to Rupert, because in fact your firms are the ones, among others, that are being approached by different cities for partnerships in these things. Are you seeing a willingness to take risk? Are you seeing leadership at the civic level for these kinds of projects? Rupert, let me begin. You don't have to name names.
No, I would say, I mean, the model has changed in the last year, definitely in the marketplace. I think a year ago, you would have said, well, the cities, whether it's one Cleveland or whatever, we're going out and saying, okay, let's figure out how to move the technology forward, because it's not, in private industry is not doing it, they're not doing pilots, so let's figure this out. I think now the model has shifted, and now the major RFPs and so on that are coming out are all basically saying, okay, private industry, you take all the risk. We may or may not even be users of your network. We'd like you to tell us about how to possibly be a user of this network. And from our perspective, if you can bring together the city, various, public safety and services organizations, the hospitals, colleges, and so on, all together, you have a much more powerful set of user base to make these economically viable to deploy.
Chris, less risk, more leadership?
I actually agree with Robert on this. I think now that the private sector is responding to these RFPs, that there isn't a lot of downside for cities. In fact, I think the risk is sloth, is creating a bureaucratic process in which technology companies can't get these things built. So if you have technology that probably has a shelf life before its next rev or its next upgrade of 3 to 5 years, and yet you create a 2 to 2.5 year process to evaluate it, to kind of impose success criteria in a vacuum, and then pick vendors, et cetera, and make them go through a long contractual process, I think you run into trouble. So for us, we were excited when the city of Mountain View approached us. We found a very forward-thinking city that was willing to contribute its lampposts to us. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of risk to a city giving us access to their lampposts. And they said, look, we want the city covered with Wi-Fi and some assurances that basically if you guys don't run the network right, you could give us the radios later and we run it ourselves. And it was a very easy conversation. It had a unanimous vote with the city council, and that network's going to go live this month.
Great. Good, great. Nicole, I want to circle back. And Nicole, you showed us the headline from USA Today. Who owns the data? And this is an issue whether AT&T's providing the service, Google, some of the other providers as well. Concern for ACLU. It's a concern for college campuses, given what we've seen with the Recording Industry of America about some of the lawsuits targeting students who are downloading content. Let's start with you, Nicole. Who owns the data in these kinds of projects, and what are the requirements for protecting data?
Well, I'm a lawyer for the ACLU, so it's probably pretty clear what my answer is going to be. We own the data. Each of us as individuals own the data, and without our permission or legal process, we retain that data. Sort of an analogy is if you're walking down the street and you have your driver's license in your pocket, no one can just stop you and say, hand over your driver's license, let me see who you are and where you live. But you do turn over that driver's license, in exchange if you want to buy something that requires an age, or if the police have proper legal process to see that information. So we retain the data unless you have given over permission, and that's explicit permission, or there's proper legal process. And here in California and across the nation, there are also really important statutory and constitutional protections on our data. Here in California, every Californian is guaranteed by the California Constitution an inalienable right to privacy, and that constitutional amendment was passed by California voters in the 1970s directly to deal with data privacy, directly to stop the creation of digital dossiers about our lives. And we have an inalienable right to that, and it can't be bought, sold, or bargained away. And so sort of historically, we control the data, statutorily, we control the data, and constitutionally, we control the data. And the ACLU is working on many fronts, as well as other civil liberties organizations, both to ensure that we're safeguarding current privacy and ensuring that those privacy and free speech safeguards are built into emerging infrastructure.
And yet this has been a contentious issue for Google in the past in terms of some of the issues with the Department of Justice, for AT&T and other providers in terms of who protects the data, that whether I'm somebody using a free Google search, if I'm an AT&T client, corporate or campus, using these services in terms of the obligation of protection. This still seems to be uncharted territory to some degree, or is it not? Rupert?
I think it's uncharted in the sense that there's a lot of work to be done on the shades of gray of privacy, because in some cases, I may be a student or something, and I say, hey, I'm going to find other people who are interested in what happened on Lost this week, right? So obviously today you go to a blog, but maybe somehow you want your actual overall internet experience to be shaped. You have these scenarios now in Europe where they're quite popular, where people with their cell phones find other people, they all suddenly converge in one location. Well, with your laptop you could do the same thing with Wi-Fi. You can find out where other people who have similar interests to you are. Now, what are the best ways to do that? There are a lot of technology issues to be solved there. But the issue, I think, the bottom line is there isn't a lot of money in protecting privacy. At the end of the day, so it's hard for startups and innovative companies to say, oh, let me think about great ways to solve privacy issues, because who's going to pay them for that? And in this, so far, the end users have not been saying, oh, I'm going to typically pay a lot of money.
End users have been doing two things behaviorally. If you look at places, things like MySpace and Friendster, there's a population that says, I don't care about privacy, I'll tell you when I'm in the shower. Right. And on the other hand, again, Chris, thinking about Google's experience with the Department of Justice and the demands for search, whether it's just a database for a research project or targeting specific users or specific issues, uncharted territory, isn't it?
I'm going to disagree with Rupert here. I think there is a lot of money in protecting privacy, and while I don't think necessarily somebody's going to cut you a check that day, I think a lot of Google's success has been the result of really establishing a trust and a bond with its users and saying we are going to work hard and we're going to go well beyond the minimum standards for privacy, and we're going to let you know, and when people come knocking trying to get information about your searches, we're going to stand up when other companies might roll over there. So I think that we have a long history with groups like ACLU and EFF of trying to work to protect that privacy, and I think we're rewarded for it in the loyalty from our users. We've taken that.
Am I going to then pay for a premium on privacy? For example, when you register a web domain today, you can choose to be either publicly registered, or in fact you can be private and hidden like an unlisted number, and you pay extra for that service. Is this the potential revenue stream in terms of protecting privacy? Gil?
Well, actually for schools, perhaps not. I mean, part of what schools are serving, universities are serving as stewards of the records for the purpose of executing our business. In the case, it's grades and transcripts and other things. We do not or should not advocate the distribution of that data for other commercial use. Students, however, are very clear with us that they are very open oftentimes of sharing information, preferably not grades, openly across our networks. The important part for us is that there are organizations around the country that are asking to peek into our local networks, collect data, so they can use it to determine whether or not we are aligning with copyright compliance, whether or not we have legal software running, whether we've allowed students to download too many copies of Lost on their iPods, and so on. So there are some areas where universities are beginning to have to rethink how we build secure networks, build networks that are open where appropriate and perhaps even required given new policies about the use of data that was not in place several years ago.
And part of the problem with having municipal wireless systems that track who you are, what you're looking at, and where you're looking at it from is that it does set up a dichotomy that if you have money, maybe you can purchase systems that are more protective of privacy. If you don't have money, then you might be having to pay for it with your privacy and free speech. And it undermines one of the major goals of municipal wireless programs, which is equal access to technology and reducing the digital divide. So that's one of the most important things is if your goal is equal access to technology and digital divide issues, you need to really think critically about those safeguards and ensuring that people are having equal access.
Well, let's touch on the access thing, if I may. I'll give you a check. Because in fact, Gil, in the video clip we saw from 5 years ago, you talked about wireless as access on college campuses. Mm-hmm. Nicole, you just raised the issue of part of the rationale, part of the drive for municipal wireless in many cases is about access, is about digital divide kinds of issues. Yet in implementation, and maybe Mountain View is not the ideal community to talk about a digital divide, admittedly, but as we look at some of the experience that Lev talked about in Cleveland, some of the stuff going on in Philadelphia, other smaller communities, will in fact this movement towards municipal wireless, municipal mobility, if you will it make a dent in the digital divide? Chris?
Sure. I would say actually Mountain View is a great community for it. So maybe the parts you visited seem like they're wired, et cetera. But, when you commit to build a network across all 11 square miles, you realize it's a very diverse community. It speaks a host of languages. And so we do think that this is going to help bridge that chasm and really lead to some true, legitimate digital inclusion. It starts with a network. You have to have a network up. You have to have an ecosystem of connectivity for devices. And then you have to have educated citizenry who know how to access the network, who understand how it works. So we're doing a lot of community outreach. But what's been fun about it is, by putting this network up, we've been getting calls from device manufacturers around the world who say, I've got a really cool Wi-Fi device. I've been waiting for a place to deploy this thing. Like, can we go and bring 100 of them and give them to the community and see how they use them and train people on how to use these devices, from laptops to gaming devices to Wi-Fi phones and everything in between, all kinds of fun hybrid devices coming out of Taiwan and out of Finland. And so I think once you build that ecosystem of connectivity, a lot of these other pieces fall into place.
Is it going to do something for the digital divide, Rupert?
I think network access is just a small part of the problem, and as everyone knows, you got to have the PCs or in this case even laptops. You have to have laptops, which is
one part is the network.
And so you got to have the infrastructure, and then you got to have laptops, and there's obviously foundations who support that. Then you got to have training. I mean, and you got to have also just an interest in using the internet. I think what we find often is, we're selling DSL at $12.99. It's still selling best in the markets where people have, they could be spending their money. They have lower income markets, but it sells to the higher income markets because they just have more interest in understanding of what the internet can do for them in their lives. Instead of ordering HBO or some premium cable channel, they say, hey, I want to do some internet. And I think that's, it's really it's going to be a change in the culture. And that starts in schools and training and devices. So the network is a small piece of it in our perspective. And we already have low cost broadband.
But I think you made a good point there, and that's you're selling DSL service, and I don't think it's necessarily a lifestyle choice, et cetera. You're selling a service that's static and is confined to one room of a house. And you're talking to a generation of people and to various ethnicities who have grown up with mobile devices as their primary means of communication, their primary means of connectivity to the internet. So you have to have a mobile solution for people who've grown up on that. We who've grown up with fixed connectivity are from the dark ages here.
Well, we're working on projects working with a homeless location in the city of Salinas. And we're building a wireless network there not because we have a choice. Right. So opportunities exist for us to work to bring people into the digital citizenry realm for various other reasons, using technology to allow them to participate oftentimes for the first time. To participate in government programs, participate in learning programs. Those are the things that make a difference, we think, long term to help reinvent the community. Because these areas have been isolated. I mean, Mountain View may have pockets of poverty. Many communities around California have large pockets of poverty, and DSL may not be the answer to motivate individuals to be engaged and to have a voice and to do it in a way so that they can, in fact, be a part of their community or be a part of a larger community probably is a better way to do it.
I've got to watch the clock, and it's running down very quickly, so I'm going to give you each 10 seconds. What do we need to watch for the next several years in terms of the public policy issues? Chris, let me begin with you.
I just would love if cities would move a little faster on this and kind of clear some of the hurdles to get out and try these things. We're up for frank debates and discussions, and let's try it, and let's see how people use it, and let's not spend 2 hours in a conference room debating it.
Rupert, 10 seconds.
I agree with Chris. I think permitting is a very big part of this,
Nicole?
A municipal wireless system that is financially viable and that has safeguards for privacy and free speech are not mutually exclusive. And I think that by working together with cities and colleges and companies and organizations like the ACLU, we can strike the right balance and ensure that as many people have access to this technology as possible.
Gil, last comment.
Well, I would say topics like net neutrality are critical here. Organizations that are trying to earn additional assets, additional resources, given the need for high bandwidth is part of the puzzle. So part of this is going to be a public policy debate it's happening now, it's in front of us. We think it's important to be engaged and to participate and for our voices to be heard as part of that debate.
Great. My thanks to the four of you, Chris, Nicole, Gil, Rupert, and to all our panelists today for their participation in this program. Our thanks to our hosts as well and the audience here at the Convention Center, WeTech, Cal State Monterey Bay for sponsoring. Our thanks to our corporate sponsors that have helped to bring this program forward, Apple, Blackboard, Campus Technology Magazine, Hewlett-Packard, SunGard Higher Education, again, Cal State Monterey Bay, the Chancellor's Office for the Cal State University System, and Case Western Reserve. And for all of us involved in Ready2Net, we hope that this has been a provocative, useful, and informative event. We'll be back in the fall. Watch our website for information about our future programs from Ready2Net. Thank you all.
At over 1,600 institutions worldwide, we have played a behind-the-scenes role in the campus experience. At SunGard Higher Education, we are proud to help colleges and universities of all types and sizes